to get to the strikers, there was no contact numbers.
It's about sacrifice and, the fact they're working class and what they went through.
His father pointed to the map and said, in this country, white people oppress other white people.
It's 2008, and playwright Tracy Ryan is listening to a radio interview. An Irish department store owner is trying to apologise to a former employee. It's not going well. That shop worker, it turns out, spent more than 2.5 years on strike at Dunne's. And Tracy had stumbled onto an astonishing forgotten story.
So I was kind of like, what's this about?
Yeah.
So I just started Googling and looking around and then started to read about the strike.
Fast forward to 2023, and with Ardent Theatre Company, Tracy brings her play Strike to the London stage, with Kirsty Patrick Ward directing.
I was just so enamoured with the characters. I loved the kind of wit that Tracy had in the writing, and they're real people.
In this final episode of Activism in the 80s, we'll explore the long journey from first spark to opening night, starting with that radio interview.
Well, I was living in Ireland and I'd been there a year or so, and I was just listening to the radio, which is RT radio, and I heard Ben Dunne was on there, and they brought on Mary Manning, and he was trying to apologise to her for the
Ben
strike.
Dunne.
He used to run Dunne's stores, yeah.
Okay.
And he would have been there during the strike.
Okay.
He would have been the kind of top guy during the strike.
Right.
So he was trying to apologise, and she was kind of really reticent. She was like, very kind of held back. And I found out later that she didn't know he was going to be on the radio show. She didn't know he was going to try and apologise.
So it wasn't set up.
It wasn't set up at
an
all.
Apology.
They were just just brought her on and said, "Look, can we bring you on?" She thought it was to do with the strike, obviously.
Yeah.
So I was kind of like, what's this about?
Yeah.
So I just started Googling and looking around, and then started to read about the strike. And I was like, wow, this
Was there much around about the strike?
There wasn't. There was fragments, and as I would find out later, Mandate and Brendan Archibald kept the story kind of going. But to get to the strikers, there was no contact numbers. I didn't know how to get hold of them. So I contacted Mandate, the union. So that was my first contact. And they put me in touch with Brendan Archibald. So I wrote to Brendan and told him a little bit about my own past, about stuff I'd been involved with politically, and said, I'm really keen to write the story of the strike. And he said, let's meet for a pint. And we did. We kind of met up, and he was great.
Where
Brendan.
did you meet?
Well, we met in Wynn's Hotel, which is just off O'Connell Street.
In Dublin?
In Dublin, yeah. So I was living there, so we met in Wynn's. Wynn's is a very famous hotel. It's known for lots of political meetings and things like that. So it was quite, a good place to meet.
Yeah?
Appropriate to meet there.
Okay.
And Brendan was amazing. He obviously was the union organiser at the time throughout the strike, and Dunnes hated him. They did see him as a red troublemaker. So Brendan was brilliant at just giving me the context of the 80s and what was going on, particularly in the south of Ireland.
Right.
Yeah, so that was brilliant. And he said, would you want to meet the strikers? And I was like, of course. And he went, well, I'm going to Australia, but they've got an anniversary meeting, so go down and meet them. And I turned up at
where did you meet them?
The Teachers Club, which is another
Tell us
kind
about the Teachers Club.
The Teachers Club is a bar, and it's a function place as well. They have a theatre there.
Again, in Dublin?
In Dublin, yeah. And so I met them there, and I kind of walked in, and I think they were a bit like, who's that? Who is this one?
Right.
And I was like, I'd like to write a play about the strike. And they were lovely, and they kind of shared pictures with me. It was an anniversary meeting. They would have them every year.
Okay.
So they were all there, their supporters. It was
Right.
a nice group of people. And
Yeah.
Karen stood up and made a speech. And what I took away from that, apart from them being absolutely lovely to me, was that there was this great kind of bond that hadn't actually gone anywhere. They'd stuck together through all this time.
Yeah.
And would meet a few times a year, and especially on the anniversary of the strike, to kind of celebrate what they'd done, but in a very low-key way. They weren't searching for publicity or anything like that. And Brendan as well was brilliant because he had an archive. When he was leaving the Mandate Union, they were going to throw out all the archive material about the strike. So like letters from bishops and people and clippings and letters from all around the world supporting them. They were going to go in bin liners and thrown out. So Brendan was like, I'll take it. So he kept hold of this really valuable archive that has been amazing for me to use and others.
He gave you access. You
He
were able
did,
to.
yeah. I went round to his house and he kind of laid it all out on the living room floor and all the clippings. And
which is brilliant for a playwright, presumably, because
God,
there's
yeah.
the research laid out in front of you.
Yeah, Yeah, and because at that time there wasn't, like you said, much online about the strike. So, say for example, RT didn't have the archive material they've put up since, because now you can look at footage that they had from that time, but there wasn't any of that. And when we did the first run of the play, I hadn't seen a picture of Nimrod. There was no kind of reference to Nimrod. Luckily, the Marxist Library and also Labour Youth had kept letters and some of his speeches.
Yeah.
But there was no images online. So it was really interesting. I found a book that he was included in, Organise or Starve, which was written about the unions in South Africa.
Right, yeah. So can you just tell us, Nimrod is a character in the play?
Yes, yeah. And Nimrod, uncannily at the time, was in exile in Dublin. He'd been involved in the freedom movement in South Africa,
right.
had been... He's been done for treason along with Nelson Mandela, and had to leave his family.
So he was living in Dublin? He was living.
He'd been all around the world. He'd been to Tanzania, Russia, Egypt, right. Begging on the streets of Egypt, really tough time, and ended up in Dublin, And it's true what he said, that his father pointed to the map and said, in this country, white people oppress other white people. So,
Right, okay.
So there was
which
that.
Is in the play.
Which is in the play.
Beautiful line. Yeah, great.
So, so that was great. And so I suppose as a writer, you just begin to pick up stuff. But I couldn't have done it without Brendan's intervention of sharing all that material with me.
So Tracy, when did you hear the Mary conversation, Ben conversation on the radio? When are we talking?
2009.
About 2009.
Yeah, early 2009.
And did you think, as most writers do, like magpies as we are, did you think immediately this could be a play, this could be or was it always maybe a story, a novel, a book or whatever, or was it always, were you thinking this could make a play?
I think play, because my background's in theatre, so I suppose the easiest thing for me is to create a play.
Yeah.
Like film and TV is completely different.
Yeah.
It's a different medium. So the thing I'm comfortable with is creating theatre. So I was like, okay. And I was shocked nobody had done it already. This was
Well, I think that is the big $1 million question. So I'm going to bring in Kirsty now. Kirsty, had you heard of this story before you had read the script?
Weirdly, I had actually heard of the strike before, but that was really by chance.
How?
I think. I know. Actually, from another podcast, the Moth podcast. So if anyone wants to hear a bit of the real Karen Gearan, there's a brilliant episode where she talks about it. And that my sister had, she'd heard it and told me about it. And I was like, how do we not know about this story? This is incredible. Why does no one know about it? So then when you guys got in touch, I was like, I actually do know about this strike. That's so weird.
Okay. Yeah. Kirsty, how did you get involved in the project in the first place?
Yeah, I mean, I was really lucky in terms of Ardent, so Andrew, you and Mark and Tracy reaching out to me to have a read of the script, and I interviewed for it, and it was, from the moment I read it, I just thought this is brilliant and epic.
Was it one of those? Was it a very quick kind of
Yes, it was.
Connection?
Yes, I think already I was intrigued by the story. But I think by the end of the first scene, that wonderful changing room scene, I was just so enamoured with the characters. I loved the kind of wits that Tracy had in the writing, and they're real people. And I think, that was me kind of hooked from that moment on, and the rest of the time. And I think actually, Tracy, the entire time I was being interviewed, I kept asking you questions, being like, and that really happened. And that really happened as well.
Tracy, let's go. If you, 2009, it started to build this idea of potentially a play. We're now 2023. So presumably since 2009 to 23, it's changed as a play, or it's exactly the same as a play? Tell us a little bit about the journey, if you like, of the play, of the script.
Yeah, it's been on a real journey, actually. So I suppose we did a production of it in 2010. So I wrote it quite quickly. I went to a cottage in Tipperary. A friend said, go down there and finish it, because we're going to put it on. So when we did it in 2010 at Trinity, at the Samuel Beckett Theatre, and also the Axis Theatre in Ballymun. So we had a very short run there. But what happened there was it really lit up the story again. I remember going to do an interview on RT Radio with Karen, and I was a little bit, because I hadn't met her again for a while, and I was going, I hope she likes the play.
Well, yeah, absolutely.
They're going to go on strike if they don't like the play.
herself.
There's going to be a picket line outside, So we were in the radio, Derek Mooney show, and they gave her a big bunch of flowers and spoke pretty much to Karen for the hour, because of course everybody was remembering the story, remembering what they did, and I think she was really shocked that they were acknowledging what they had done, because as we learn in the play, the ending, things weren't so easy at the end either. So we did the play then, and great response. And I think it was that triggering of the story again in people's memories. And we had people like, I was on the picket line. Yeah. It was like the Sex Pistols gig. Yeah. Like everybody was on the picket line.
Right.
But and we had ex-Dunstore workers coming to watch it who had supported it, and people from Cork who'd supported it. We had a real lot of people who'd supported it back in the day. And then we tried to get funding, but at the time we had a cast of 18, so it was even bigger than it was.
So there was 18 in that original, and so now there are 13.
13, which I can verify is quite a lot of people.
I'm going to get to that, Kirsty. I've got a few questions around the size of that cast and how you deal with that. Okay, so it was started, and were you were responsible for kind of putting it on, Tracy? Did you have people behind you helping, producing, etc.?
Yeah.
Or was it you pretty much?
It was me directing, because we wanted to get on quite quickly. I was working with Helen Ryan as producer, and we wanted to get it on. Yeah. And you to hand a person a script with 18 people and saying you've got 4 weeks is quite a huge thing to do. So I kind of thought, well, first time out, I'd take it on as director. Yeah. But we had like Ben Dunne in it. We had bishops. We had all the other characters in it as well. Okay. We even had Bono in it for a few seconds. So it was again the story of the strike, which I found really interesting because the length of it and the sticking together of the strikers. But we had all the other characters coming in, and what we found, Helen and I, when we reflected on it, was people were interested in the strikers. So every time they were on, when we were focused on them, that's when it kind of, they enjoyed all the other stuff. It was very agitprop, very in that tradition. Yeah. But it was the strikers people were interested in, and also Nimrod and Brendan Archibald. Yeah. Those relationships were the ones that really stood out. Yeah. So we tried to get funding, but obviously it's such a big... we know in theatre it's you do
absolutely.
A monologue, you do 2 people.
Yeah.
That's it. But
so then what happened? How long did you keep trying to raise those sort of funds to be able to do more with it?
Yeah, for a couple of years, and I think luckily in 2015 I was talking to Mark and yourself, and I were involved in those conversations, and you became interested in it. Ardent became interested, and I was like, oh my God, this is great,
Yeah. It was Mark that brought it to the table, Tracy, without a doubt. And bringing a cast of that size, I was like, immediately, absolutely not. There's no way. And then read it and just fell in love with it as a story. Yeah, something I'd never heard of. And that's why I think we really went for it.
Yeah, and what I really appreciated with Ardent was, one thing I always thought was, I'm not getting rid of any of the strikers. I don't want to, do composite characters because all those Henry Street strikers stood on the line and they stood out there and lost so much but gained a lot politically in education and themselves. But I'd feel really uneasy to kind of take out any of the Henry Street strikers. Yeah.
Totally. So that was 2015. It landed on our desk, didn't it, at Ardent. And now 2023, we finally managed to make the production and put it on. Kirsty, when you got that script with that many actors, we knew it was at the Southwark Playhouse, didn't we? That had been booked.
Yeah.
So you knew the kind of space we were talking about. Mm-hmm. How on earth did you manage it?
Took a deep breath.
Yeah.
I felt, I think Tracy had done a brilliant job in the script, in making it, handling those characters. And, for me, it was looking for those through lines and finding those journeys, and particularly their activist journeys. And I think that's one of the things I love about the play is they really don't know anything about activism at the beginning.
At the beginning, right, yeah.
The reason they got into the strike is because it's a union directive. They don't actually really quite know what they're striking for. It's only through meeting Nimrod, meeting other South Africans in exile, that they actually understand what apartheid is. Yeah. And I loved that kind of journey of it. And there's a lot of scenes. There's 23 scenes.
23 scenes.
23 scenes. And some of the scenes have scenes within them. So
you've got 13 actors with 23 scenes in that sort of tight space. And at any one time, Kirsty, have we got all 13 on stage at the same time?
Yes, quite a few. Yeah, there are quite a few moments.
So how on earth do you direct that? How do you do that?
Yes,
I mean, that's your skill, obviously.
Absolutely. But staging is important.
Yeah.
I think you've just got to make sure that it feels totally undirected, but at the same time, there's a really clear plan of where people need to be, because you want to feel like you're one of the strikers in those big group scenes.
Yeah.
So when you're on the picket line, when you're in Brendan's office, because it's performed on 3 sides, it's incredibly immersive.
Yeah.
So it's about making sure that your sight lines are clear, but at the same time you're embracing the fact that there are that many people on stage, and particularly women as well. It's just not something you see in theatres in general, let alone in fringe theatres.
Yeah.
So the staging needed to be specific, and also the big thing for me was forward momentum and front-footedness, because the energy those strikers have when you meet them and the stakes of what they're going through, you never want it to feel episodic. It's got to always front-footedness is always the note.
What does front-footedness mean, like from an acting perspective?
Yeah, it's kind of, I mean, it's the opposite to being on the back foot, isn't it? It's about keeping the thought on the line rather than kind of having a think and then saying your line.
Yeah.
And also, I do think that's a wonderfully Irish trope as well, of just being, there's an energy and a kind of wit and speed to the way that people talk. And it's reflected brilliantly in Tracy's writing. So honouring that felt important. And, it's got to be slick. And I also felt the big thing was there is also a terrifying Google Doc, which is our 4-week rehearsal schedule, where literally every moment of those 4 weeks is planned out, because I just needed to get it out.
That's what I was going to ask. How much plan it literally like?
I mean, everyone's got different processes as a director. I like to have a 4-week schedule.
Yeah.
So then I basically work it backwards from how many times I want to run it in the rehearsal room, because I think the big thing with this show is those actors have got to have ownership over it. It's so huge, and you're telling, 3 years of people's lives, and that's what I love about theatre, is you get a whole world on stage and you're living their lives and you see them grow and change. But in order to do that, the actors, they've got to have very left brain, right brain. You've got to be totally in the scene, but also know what the hell is coming up
next. Yeah, totally.
I mean, our first run through it was brilliant. You'd have people kind of come in and be like, oh no, it's not this scene, and then walk off.
Back I go.
Which was fantastic.
Yeah.
But that's why we needed to do 3 in the rehearsal room before we got into tech, because it's the first few times the company were chasing the play.
Yeah.
And then by the end, they were the ones driving it.
Yeah.
And that felt really important to kind of have that level of ownership over it, because it's a great story. So you don't want to... we also did some cuts. We cut about 12 pages over the course of the 4 weeks, and just refining and interrogating things. And Tracy was brilliant for that, because, you've also got 13 fantastic minds in the room.
Totally.
So to not utilise that, I just think as a director, you're shooting yourself in the foot, and there's a kind of vanity that comes to that. A good idea is a good idea.
Absolutely. Tracy, how did you, as playwright in the room working alongside Kirsty, Kirsty talks about potentially 12 pages maybe being cut. How was that for you, that sort of process, being in the room, getting an understanding of what worked, what didn't work, and making cuts as you go?
Yeah, I'm absolutely fine with that. And I think that maybe is the director's head as well. If something's not working. I think in our first read-through of it, when we sat in the big circle and read it, I think we sat down, the 3 of us, and there were 7 pages gone. Because you can hear it, when it drags. I should probably also say that whole kind of dramaturgical support has been going on for a few years through Ardent, and which has been invaluable as well. We work with Shelley Troop and then work with yourself, Andrew.
Great.
So it's been great. I don't know how to explain how amazing it is for a writer to be able to go back and spend time with something. I've changed.
Yeah.
My relationship with the strikers has changed. I've got to know them a bit better, through the years. I know more now, So
completely.
So having the time to reflect that into the script has been amazing.
Yeah.
And I think all of us, it's something about their story that engages people. Whenever we've done readings, and we've done quite a few public readings with Ardent, so we're testing it out,
absolutely.
which has been incredible.
Yeah.
But every actor that's been involved, I don't know if you found this, Kirsty, they just connect with the story.
I agree.
And there is something which, you don't often see that, but there's a passion to tell the story and to tell it well. And I think all of us felt that. And so I was very happy for it to be slick, clean, get rid of anything that would drag it down at all.
It became very expedient and very tight. And one of the things that I've always admired about you as a writer is how well you just take on board sort of feedback, notes, and that you'll go away, think about them. It's your choice whether you use them or not, but you have kind of, for me, when it landed in 2015, I felt it was still slightly needed a bit more theatricality to it, that sort of language, you've created it now. For me, it has become such a theatrical piece. It really is exciting to watch. And like all the stuff that Kirsty, your team that you brought in, the lights, the sound, the movement, I mean, it's taking it onto another level.
Yeah, I mean, there was a huge... The other thing I kept saying in rehearsals is it is a play, it's not a documentary.
Yeah.
So how do we make it theatrical? And, like movement-wise, one of the most powerful scenes I would say in the show is when, Tommy is beaten up by the police, right? And that didn't exist. It was a very different scene that was more historically accurate. But what we wanted to do was show police brutality on a much wider scale, that this actually can be is happening all over the world in different contexts. So, and there's a moment in the show where, because the strikers don't have any money to have proper wet weather shoes, they're putting plastic bags inside their shoes. And it felt a really important story point to share because it's about sacrifice and, the fact they're working class and what they went through, but also to show it theatrically. So Ira Mandela Siobhan, our amazing movement director, I literally did say to him, I was like, so they need to put them on stage. We've got this piece of music. Off you go.
Go Ira. Yeah.
Go Ira. And he was amazing. Yeah. And it took a lot of work. There was definitely a point where I was like, is this going to work?
Yeah.
But through his brilliant movement direction and also the real commitment of the cast, you're so right, Tracy. I think everyone feels they believe in the story they're telling and they feel a responsibility to honour it. So if ever anything is tough, you're like, well, good. Yeah, nothing good. Nothing worth having is easy.
Yeah.
So ploughing through. So the movement, I think, the theatricality felt important, and show don't tell, right? That thing, and trusting great actors of they've done that in a look. They don't need to say that anymore.
Yeah.
Did you find that, Tracy?
Oh, absolutely. And I have to say, Kirsty was brilliant. I mean, we met several times before. I mean, as soon as I think all of us heard you on the interview, we were like, for me anyways, that slickness that you talked about and the way that it moved and everything, I thought that's it. Because otherwise it gets stodgy, and the audience are looking at their watches, you know. So, but afterwards when we met and we'd go through and you'd ask me questions and we'd talk about lines. So that was really important. Yeah. It's such a collaborative process.
Yeah, it really is.
The whole thing,
Can I just going to backtrack a little bit because something I'm really interested in is the fact that this is based on real people. So for both of you, as director and as writer, you're writing a play based on a truth and a reality in terms of all these characters. How did you find that? I mean, in terms of, did it mean that it was easier or was it more difficult? Were there particular characters in reality that you kind of chose to embellish slightly more than others? How did it work when everything's there factual?
I suppose that's always the thing, isn't it? Because you want to respect also the people you're portraying as well, but also want to tell a story. So there is stuff that's fictionalised. For example, Sinead, who crosses the picket line, is a composite character of friends who cross the picket line. And for the strikers, I suppose you want to tell their story but respect them because...
Were you nervous, Tracy, about that sort of slightly changing it? Did you think you needed to seek permission or did you just go for it?
I kind of went for it. I think especially in the original one, I kind of naively and, just wanted to tell the story and that. But I suppose afterwards, that kind of relationship that grew from that, I could talk to some of the strikers and just clarify things. And
did that help talking to strikers? Did it help having all that information? Or at times was it just too much and, too many facts and figures and information?
Well, I tell you what, Andrew, what I decided to do was tell the story of the strike. So of an action, of a strike in action. So that gave me the through line.
Yeah.
And so that became another character that drove through. And so everything kind of came from that, moved on from that. So in some ways, that's been the same from the beginning, that through line is what it is. Yeah.
And specifically, the Nimrod character. Tell us about how you felt writing that particular character.
Yeah, I suppose again, it's a long time ago when I first, wrote it. So I suppose I was very keen to have the character represented. And I suppose since Ardent took it on, we have had workshops and we have consulted with actors,
Yeah.
and I know Kirsty spoke a lot with Mensa and, discussing the role.
Yeah.
So that's been invaluable as well,
Yeah.
that kind of contribution and kind of just testing out and hearing out and things like that,
Well, there was a language we found in the show, which actually kind of, it was subtly embedded, but it came out, it was something I wanted to, I pulled out more in the staging once we started running it together, which is Nimrod, and this is so kind of based in truth, right? I think like Mary talks about it a lot in her book. He's very much also an architect of the strike. He is encouraging them, advising them the whole time, because he is a freedom fighter, and he's exactly the kind of person that history never talks about. That actually, without the Nimrods of the world, these things wouldn't happen. But so often their stories are never told. So it felt really important to us to readdress that. And me and Tracy talked a lot about it. We developed that a lot in terms of his relationships to the other strikers, because they would spend hours hours on the picket line, but also years together. So it was really important to get inside him as a character, why he was doing it, and what the relationships were. And he's represented. It's all those unsung heroes in activism, I think.
And as you say, to begin with, the majority of those strikers were fairly ignorant of what was going on, and so through the character of Nimrod, they learn. As I learnt also as an audience member, as hopefully other audience members learnt too, it was that whole process of becoming more aware of it, I think.
And that's what's really exciting to watch, to watch that you don't have to be fully informed to start, to take the first step on something you believe in, because there are others who've been part of the struggle for longer, who pass on information, who pass the baton on, so, and that's what a beautiful thing, it's that kind of multi-generational thing, isn't it? That we actually can pass on knowledge to each other.
Totally.
Yeah, and it's so important.
Kirsty, I know, when you're in the room, when you're in the rehearsal room and you're directing a bunch of actors and you start talking about characterization and all that sort of stuff. And sometimes we don't know anything about the characters because they're not based on fact. But you had a bunch of actors who you knew somewhere there's going to be information about those particular characters.
Yeah.
How did you do that? What was that sort of process?
It was a really fine line because we're not doing an impression of people.
No.
And also the people written in our play, they're Tracy's take on it.
Yeah.
There's already there's a lens it's coming from. So I think, and also just for me in terms of casting, it's not about casting people that look like them. It's about casting people that embody the character, their relationships to each other, what they bring to the table, who they are. That felt much more interesting to me and actually much more respectful than being, I'm just going to cast someone that looks a bit like that person. So that felt, from day one, there was a very clear delineation of we're not doing an impression of them. There may be references for things. So, for example, like Mary in the show is wearing a Bruce Springsteen t-shirt because I know she loves Bruce Springsteen and they went to a gig and it's important to the story. But there was a moment where Adam wanted to wear glasses for Tommy, and because that is factually correct. But I was like, but hang on, that doesn't feel correct in the Tommy we have created.
Yeah.
So you've got to be really careful, I think, because also you're too reverend, and there's a difference between a character and a real person.
Yeah.
So being really clear about the boundaries of that.
Tell me, what is it like to have the real people in the auditorium watching your work?
Very stressful. Because I could see them. Oh no,
how many did we have?
They were sat in front of you,
Sat
right?
in front of me, yeah.
Trace,
So
how many did we have?
We had Michelle couldn't make it, unfortunately, or Tommy, so we had everybody else.
Everyone else,
yeah, we had everyone
so
there.
So what did that feel like?
Well, I suppose I'm in a different position to Kirsty because I would have met them over the years, and there's been so many readings, and there's always 2 or 3 of them that come and listen and talk to actors, because they also came and talked to actors as well for our one. So there's always that. So I still wanted them to enjoy it because I know it had changed. And actually,
exactly. So it's something new, wasn't it? Something fresh.
And Kirsty's direction had brought out so much beautiful work and everything. So I just wondered what they would think of this, and you're always very sensitive to how they might feel.
Yeah.
And I think they saw it twice, didn't they, Kirsty? The first night was very jubilant because it was the opening press night, and everyone was amazed. And the second time they watched it in the matinee with some school, and they really took in the story. And I think again,
when I saw them coming out of that matinee, it seemed to really hit them. It was quite powerful.
How was it for you, Kirsty, though?
Yeah, I mean, you've got to also not think about it too much. You've got to you've got to tell the story. Tell the story with heart and truth and conviction and respect for what they did, tell their story the best. The best thing you can do for them is tell their story well. And I was totally fine until the lights went down and I grabbed my husband's hand and I was like, I really hope they like it. Because you feel a responsibility, you know. What they did was amazing.
Of course.
And I kind of, as soon as there was, you know, it was lovely standing ovation and applause, and I was like, great, cool. So I kind of, you know, snuck over to Karen, and she just gave me a massive hug, and I was like, great, this is excellent. And they were really moved, and it was so moving on press night to have the real strikers meet the people playing them.
Oh, yeah.
It was very special, and actually, and it was one of those great things where I was just like, well, look, whatever happens in terms of, you know, reviews is part of theatre. It's what, you know, they're important. It's why we do it, but it's not the reason we do it.
Yeah.
And I think their reaction, and also actually other people involved in activism who had come and seen the show and been moved by it and felt that it was authentic, that I was like, well, that's who I care about their opinion the most, actually. Yeah. So I was relieved.
Yeah. And we also had Brendan's sons in with us. Which
you had
was,
Brendan's sons?
Yeah, who came to see it. And that was really important. You know, and they met Paul, who plays Brendan, and yeah.
Kirsty, can I ask, just kind of get a real insight into the kind of the script, etc. Was there a particular scene where you thought, I don't know how I'm going to do this? Was there anything in that play that was like, oh my goodness, this is a difficult bit?
Yeah, I mean, there's lots of...
Tell us, share.
Confess now.
Yeah.
There's lots of... But it's kind of what directors live for, you know? The excitement of how are we going to tell it. I had an amazing creative team. I think that's really important to say. So Ira Mandela Chabon, incredible movement director, who actually Ardent introduced me to. I'd not worked with him before, but we just instantly clicked. I think what his movement brought to the story really helped in like what's a theatrical way of telling it. But also Jamie Platt, our amazing lighting designer, and Dom Brennan, who was in rehearsals a lot because the music is really important. Who did the sound. It's really important to capture the atmosphere and also keeping us in the 80s. So working collaboratively with them.
Was that your choice? Those tunes, were they you? Yes, were they you, Tracy? Who was it?
Well, some are in the script, which is very helpful from Tracy, but also me and Dom spent a lot of time choosing that music really specifically.
The music's fantastic.
Yeah.
It is great, but also just joyous as well. Like it is one of, I do wonder if sometimes the reason I went into directing is because I get to encourage people to listen to good music.
Yeah.
They don't have a choice. They have to listen to this great song.
It's great
celebrated.
music.
And it's the power of it as well, you know. And I think that's the other thing with theatre is it is so collaborative. And Libby, our amazing designer, you know, God, when we got that set together,
that's what I was going to ask about.
Yeah, when they first got on those
that
costumes.
set with doors, this. I mean,
so clever.
When I saw Libby's model of it, I actually got very emotional then because I thought this is just incredible. Her vision for how it was going to work, and so supported you, Kirsty, and you know that movement and quickness and everything was incredible.
And that's also, I suppose, one of those things where you were talking about, Kirsty, in terms of actors coming in and not being there, shouldn't have been there, and those first couple of rehearsals. You know, what was that set like to use? Because it's 3 panels with some drawers and a couple of, you know, but everything's in there. Yeah,
it's wonderfully, it's so versatile and slick, whilst it never feel it's encroaching with the space. Because, I kept stating, look, I am just going to need space. We can't have anything. I'm not having a table that's difficult to get on and off. It just can't happen. Scene changes are literally sometimes a couple of seconds. It's really important. And Libby totally understood that. And that was just dreamy. Because I think if you're a director and you're a designer, if you're not entirely clear on your theatrical language, it's never going to work. And I think she was so great to collaborate with in terms of how do we solve these problems and how do we be resourceful with things. So the set really helps, and it helps the actors so much, but also those costumes, which are so completely correct of the time. I mean, the energy that has gone into sourcing all of that really says a lot.
Yeah. How do you feel about the way it's gone, both of you?
Well, for me, it's been an absolute joy that it's...
Has it?
Yeah, I've just loved every minute of it, you know, and I think
Have you been in much to watch it?
I have. I would come in all the every week, and obviously, with respect for everyone, but I really enjoyed it, and I just see, like with Kirsty, I agree with you, seeing the audience reaction to it, because they're so engaged, and
Yeah, how have you found that audience response?
Well, we're getting standing ovations practically every time, which is incredible. But there's a silence. I don't
Why
know if
is
you've noticed
that,
that,
do you
Kirsty.
think? What
I
is that
think
about?
it's the story, hearing the story, because it's new here. You know, obviously people involved in the anti-apartheid movement would be aware of it, but it's quite new to a lot of people.
Yeah.
I think also because we are at a certain time at the moment where it felt relevant when we did it originally, but it feels really relevant now. You know, the whole idea of what striking means and trying to save that as, you know, as that we are allowed to strike, you know, for whatever it is. I mean, they did an incredible thing. They went on strike for people they didn't even know. And
they went on strike for 2 weeks, didn't they?
Originally 2 weeks. Brendan Archibald said 2 weeks would be finished.
And that's it, done.
Done.
And it ended up...
It wasn't done. 2 years,
2 years,
8
9
months.
months,
Yeah, it was a long, long strike,
Yeah.
You know, and I think that capacity to stay out on strike, to go against the church at the time, their bosses definitely, you know, and to keep going. You know, they had food thrown at them from the top of the Dunne staff room.
I mean, Kirsty, it is some of the moments in the play that Tracy captures, they are quite extraordinary, aren't they? I mean, the flight to South Africa.
Yeah, and kind of what really happened, but it's oppression, you know, and that's going on all the time.
Yeah.
All the time. I mean, that's what is so moving, but also difficult about the play is there are so many links you can make to what is happening now. But that's why I think the ending is really important, and what has been so satisfying for me in terms of people I know that have come to see the show, but also people that I don't know, people that have just spoken to me, is a feeling of hope and being galvanised that actually when we pull together we can achieve incredible things.
It does feel like that solidarity, that moment at the end.
Yeah.
You feel compelled, don't you, to join them on that line, on that picket line.
And I was very conscious of that, because I thought, I don't want people to come away going, well, what can we do? There's nothing we can do. They do that then, we can't do anything. I think it's really important. And we know through looking at the history of theatre, like the Workers' Theatre movement, Joan Littlewood's work, that you can create theatre that galvanises rather than leaves you depressed. And I think it's particularly important to show working class people with agency. Like for me, that's so important. And we're losing that a little bit, and we need to tell those stories, you know, because that has changed the world. Yeah,
completely.
And at Karen, we had a brilliant Zoom with the real Karen Gearan before we started rehearsals. I was trying very hard not to fangirl and failed massively. And I said to her, "What do you want audiences to take away?"
That's the question. Yeah. What do you want?
What do you want audiences to take away from the show? And she said, "I want people to feel that they can do things, that you can achieve things." And I think we've done that, which is great.
Yeah, I think so. And I think that's handing on the baton, isn't it? And I think we need to tell more stories that celebrate the success of movements, you know, and coming together, how we can achieve so much.
Yeah.
We need to see more of that,
I agree.
Because over the years we've seen less of the last decade or so.
Yeah.
You know.
It's for me, as kind of producer on it, to have been able to sit in there and watch this extraordinary piece of work directed by you, Kirsty, written by you, Tracy. The audience afterwards, to speak to them, and for them, I would say 9 out of 10 saying to me, genuinely, I didn't know anything about this story. I knew nothing. It's incredible. It's extraordinary. So for me, more people need to witness this and need to share in this story. Because I think you're right, it's a universal piece. It has resonance like you cannot believe right now. It's embedded so deep within us all in this sort of community that we live in, where we are feeling slightly agitated, to say the least. Now is the time, it feels. It really is capturing something, a mood. And I think that's where it resonates so powerfully right now.
Yeah, and strikers are being demonised. People are being told not to strike, and it's reminding people why actually people strike. That it's
and what a strike can do.
Completely.
Yeah, and we've seen that. It is changing things.
Yeah.
You know, you have to have the right to strike, you know. Now, Ireland, interestingly, 10 or 20 years later, took out the right to strike on an issue of conscience. And that's the thing, they're always pulling back. You know, here now you can't do solidarity strikes. You know, so if it didn't work, they would just leave it alone. So striking and collective action works. You know, we've seen that in Ireland. I've been living in Ireland the last decade. We've had the decade of centenaries, which is celebrating the Rising, the 1916 Rising in Ireland, you know, and a whole things that came from that. But at the same time, people have been galvanised in Ireland. At the end of the bank bailout, Ireland was in a huge, deep recession. But you've seen people on the streets in the Right to Water campaign, you know, the gay marriage referendum, the abortion rights campaign. It's been a real mobilisation of people coming together. Yeah. And so you're right, this time is a really interesting time.
And you've been able to, you've been going into a couple of schools, haven't you, to capture that sort of age, that sort of... How is the play kind of like, how is it working with that sort of, you know, age group, if you like? So I know we've had a couple of school parties in and they've been totally engrossed. And then to have you go in and meet them and chat through some stuff, how has that been?
Yeah, I've been doing the workshop with Zita Holborn, who's amazing,
right.
a multidisciplinary artist. And Zita herself was involved in the anti-apartheid movement.
Yeah. She
even spent time in South Africa and had a real kind of visceral reaction to it. She's an amazing artist and also involved in union activity as well.
Right.
So it's been really interesting. That like you say, they're very engaged.
Yeah.
Now, the teachers have been amazing. They've done a lot of work around
right.
apartheid, so the students go in with some knowledge as well.
Yeah.
But I think it's the fact that they were young people.
Mm-hmm.
The strikers themselves
were young people, and there's suddenly that connection
of young people and what you can do.
Yeah. And Zita and I, you know, we talk about our own backgrounds. You know, I'm a working class background, you know, and how we've continued to make art, you know. And I suppose the one thing I got from, I grew up in Newham, went to Theatre Royal Stratford East workshops, was that if there's not a play out there that tells you that story, create it. Make your own work.
Absolutely.
You know, and
Brilliant.
I think as we go to schools, we're kind of saying, make your own work. Yeah. We don't know all the stories that are here to tell, so let's tell them.
Okay. Particularly the stories of young women, I have to say. Because I do feel that part of the reason the strike isn't as well known is the majority of them were young women.
Yeah.
They've said that themselves, I
really?
think. Yeah, I think they're, and they're working class.
If they'd been young then,
you know,
perhaps it might have been slightly different.
I think
Kirsty.
it would have been. I'm going to say it, guys. The patriarchy is real. We're moving forward, we've still got a long way to go.
Yeah.
But isn't it interesting? Because it's also the same, you know, that now... history is weird, isn't it? Because you kind of, the people who were there right during the time, like the strikers, like other activists, you know, everybody can join it 10, 20 years later, but those who were there right in the crux of it deserve our admiration and recognition. Yeah.
And so I'm going to wrap this up just with one kind of final question, really, is what's going to happen next to strike?
I mean, surely this is a question for our esteemed producer.
Well, we should probably say the 40th anniversary is next year.
Yeah, so I think the dream is to hit the Dublin, isn't it? Is to get it into Ireland.
Yeah.
And I do have to, personally, as someone who directs in London but also regionally, it's really important. I would love to see it tour because I think it speaks to so many people, and it would be great to not let it be London centric, to take it to Ireland and Dublin, absolutely, but
and
also
to the Newcastles, the Manchester, the regions.
Completely,
exactly.
Yeah.
Liverpool,
all of these, Liverpool, all of these cities.
Yeah,
exactly.
it's one of those stories. You're absolutely right. And Hollywood, Tracy?
I mean, for me, it's that you can't get, theatre just has that live interaction. When you sit in a room with 200 people and they're listening, and like you say, they're being engaged, they're moved, and you know, that to me is, you can't replicate that. That's a different medium.
Yeah,
you know,
totally.
Theatre is really special for that. Yeah.
Thank you both so much. It's been an absolute pleasure.
Thank you.
Thank you,
Andrew.
Bringing Strike to the stage has been an amazing experience for us at Ardent. We are so grateful to Tracy and Kirsty and all of the many others who worked so very hard to make the show a success. And thank you for watching Activism in the 80s. Don't forget to like, subscribe and leave a 5-star review.